We asked for your questions about objectivist philosophy, and you submitted them. Answering your questions on philosophy is something we're making a regular feature of this podcast. Today is our 6th installment of this series. Welcome to New Ideal Live, the podcast of the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm Sam Weaver, Junior Fellow at ARI, and with me are Aaron Smith, Fellow and Instructor at ARI, and Mike Mazza, Associate Fellow at ARI. Welcome, Aaron and Mike.
Thanks.
Hi, Sam.
Thanks for being here. The first question, or the first issue that we wanted to raise today is one that actually several people asked us about. And so a question that sort of combines what these different questioners were interested in is the following. How much should objectivists value physical health, diet, and exercise?
So I should say at the outset, I am neither a dietary nutrition or an exercise specialist or a health professional, and I think none of us really are here. So the advice or perspective we're offering here is coming from more from a philosophic perspective than anything else. And I think I should just say something about the context of the question. I think that if you know anything about objectivism, or if you've read up about objectivism takes man's life very seriously. And in the context of morality, it treats man's life as the standard of moral value. So this is it's a big deal in objectivism. And if you want to read more about that, the essay, The Objectivist Ethics by Ayn Rand is worth getting into. But I think that's part of the background of where the question is coming from. Objectivism holds that man's life is the standard of value. And in that context, if that's true, how much should we value things like physical health, fitness, diet, longevity, and so on? I think the first thing to say, objectivism is a philosophy. It's a philosophic system, and it doesn't have dietary recommendations or exercise advice or you should live X number of years, and so on. So as a philosophy, what it tells you to do is that if you want to live successfully, you need to be rational. You need to be rational about your choices. You need to be rational about which values you pursue and the manner in which you pursue them. And that can include things like health and diet and your physical appearance and fitness and whatever. But objectivism doesn't treat these as their ends in themselves, because, life is what you're trying to achieve. Therefore, you should do X in fitness. It doesn't have advice on that. It says be rational about what you're doing. In effect. So that's the more general point, I think I would say. So when it comes to, how seriously do we take physical health? And part of the one aspect of the question that we got, it was, what does it say about a person who takes objectivism seriously, but cares little about their health, weight, diet, longevity, and so on? I think if you literally don't care anything at all about your health, you're sick or diseased and suffering, or you're healthy, like you literally don't care. You don't really care much about your life. And then you have to ask why that is, and that's a real problem. But if you do love your life and you want to live it, you can ask the question. It makes sense to ask, like, how important should things like this be? Should diet and exercise loom large, or it's whatever, it's optional? And I think that just depends on a lot of different factors. For the person's values and so on.
Aaron, I think one thing to keep in mind is that, especially when we're talking about health, exercise, longevity, there's a context in which those things come up that's important to keep in mind, and that's that life ends, and we all have to budget our time and and values accordingly. So if you're thinking about, it's kind of like, if I embark on this onerous exercise program, I'll likely lengthen the time of life I have by 3 or 4 years. How important is that to you? There's not a universal answer to that. You have to think about the other things you have going on in your life, how much effort's involved. Now, if the payoff of a good exercise program or something like 20 extra years, then things would be different. So there's an issue of magnitude and time management here. And I mean, to talk about diet, suppose giving up your favorite food gave you an extra 5 years. Would you give it up? I mean, I don't think there's a straightforward answer to that. I don't think I would. If it gave me an extra 20 years, then I'd likely consider it. So all of these things make a difference to how you think about the value of diet and exercise in your life.
Yeah, and it's partly about managing your various kinds of values and priorities. I know some people who don't care. We were talking about food. I love food, but we were talking about food, and I know some people that just really don't care about food. Like they could say, I know a guy who was like, if I could just take a pill, like on Star Trek or whatever, and that's my nutrition, that they would do it. So maybe they wouldn't care, and they could give up all sorts of stuff, butter and bacon, and who knows whatever. Some people have criticized and so on. But that depends on how important these things are to your life. Another aspect of the question we got was, is it possible to care about objectivist ideas of living the best and longest life you can and give your own physical health low priority? Well, first of all, just to correct something in the question, objectivism doesn't say that you should live the longest life possible. So that's nowhere in objectivism is, you're aiming at longevity. As an end, in effect. So I wouldn't package best and longest life together as like a single goal. But it also depends, what do you mean by giving your physical health low priority? Like you refuse to go to the doctor if your liver's failing, you're like, yeah, whatever. Like, I mean, if you're young and you have a life in front of you, it's like, that's one thing. But if you mean giving it a low priority, you're like not a health nut, or you're reading up on books on diet and you spend a lot of time doing that, and you're on a work program and you're on some paleo diet or whatever it is. It's like it's the person who doesn't treat it like that. I don't think that's giving health a low priority. And health is wider, I think, than things like fitness. Yeah, I mean, for example, like I exercise a bit, but I don't follow any kind of diet. Not that I'm the model for anybody, but I mean, I probably eat too much. But I love eating. It's one of the great enjoyments of my life. And as Mike says, I think he loves shellfish, but for me, it's sushi and all sorts of food. But there are probably healthier ways maybe that I could eat if I really wanted to spend the time doing some real research. And there's a lot of conflicting stuff in that diet literature, and so it's not exactly clear what I would follow anyway if I'm trying to be rational. It's so I think I eat fairly sensitively, but I'm not doing like longevity calculations. But if I had good reason to think that this is really not healthy, or I would limit intake. But I would, again, it wouldn't loom large, I think, in my life unless I thought it was really poisonous.
Yeah, I think there's a question too about what exactly you mean when you say, well, I exercise to be healthier. So you can embark on a exercise program to be stronger. That might not actually make you live longer, since the questioner also brought up longevity. Is a CrossFit athlete healthier than somebody whose average weight doesn't really exercise? I mean, in some sense, I guess so. They're probably less likely to have a heart attack. They're stronger. Those sort of things you hear about diet and exercise. But are they more likely to live longer? I don't think that's true as far as I know. So it's important, if you're thinking about these things as values, to think about, like, what am I really trying to accomplish in my exercise? Or am I trying to live longer? Am I trying to be stronger and less frail? Am I trying to look a certain way? It's all of those things could be considered, healthy, but they're not all the same. I've heard that extreme calorie restriction is correlated with longevity, and if that's true, I mean, then that probably means you can't be any kind of strength or endurance athlete. So what do you value there? Do you value looking strong and being strong, or do you value increased number of years, or what?
Yeah, and another aspect of this question, there are lots of aspects of the question because we got several on this theme, and one was that Ayn Rand's kind of heroic characters tend to have a lean and healthy looks. Did she have much to say explicitly about the priority given to the care of the body and so on? And I think no, I don't think she did, at least not to my knowledge. I mean, maybe Shoshana or someone who's writing a biography or something would know a little bit more about that, but I don't think so. But also, I think even if she did, there's a difference here between Ayn Rand's views, like say on what you should eat or something, and what objectivism has to say as a philosophy. And I think those are separate issues. So diet and fitness and stuff are not philosophic issues. They relate to philosophy in the sense that if you value them, it comes into the field of values and value pursuit and how rational you're being about it. But it doesn't have any kind of way. I mean, those are specialized issues. So, I mean, I exercise, but mainly because I want to keep demanding something of my body. So it has to realize I need to be ready for the task. So I mean, I'm in my 40s and stuff. And I mean, I want to be able to walk and hike and do things, into as far as I can in my old age. And so I need to demand something of myself. But again, they're not ends in themselves. And just the fact that objectivism treats life as so central that you're optimizing for physical fitness and you're optimizing for longevity and you're optimizing for maximum health, all other values set to one side is not important or something. So just to head off that sort of potential perspective.
Yeah, as far as the characters in the novels go, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's a lot that goes into creating a character, which isn't just philosophy, moral thinking. So they're Rand's characters, and if she liked, how did the questioner describe them? Lean and healthy looking. If that's the kind of body shape she prefers, I mean, it makes sense that she'd make the characters that she likes look that way. That can just be her preference. There's aesthetic preference. Yeah, that doesn't translate into there being some kind of moral virtue in staying lean or something like that.
And also in literature, okay, now a little tangent here, but I think in literature too, there's certain things that are conveyed or projected by the physical appearance of, somebody who's single-minded in their pursuit of purpose, like Howard Rourke is like a stripped down character. In a way, he's just naked purpose, and pursuit of a goal. And there's a sense in which there might be an aesthetic relationship between the way she sees the physical appearance of the character and what it would convey, if he looked like he'd just been sitting on his couch all of his life, so.
I can imagine Rourke forgetting to eat because he's obsessively working over something. Yeah. But I mean, like as a rule in his life, he eats infrequently because he's always working, and like you could convey that. I mean, that might show something that he's like slim and lean, is that he's not somebody who spends a lot of time.
And also like Kira in We the Living, also she forgets to eat, and I wonder if this might be something about Ayn Rand. I mean, again, she's so devoted to her career and purpose, and I don't know that she made a big deal about food and cuisine and dinner, and I don't know that loomed large in her life. I probably didn't, and I don't think she exercised. I think she was very single-minded in her purpose, and other things sort of would take a backseat.
So we've been talking a little bit about the kind of appearances of Ayn Rand's characters, and that connects to another issue that came up in one of the other versions of this question. Was somebody discussed the idea of being very conscious of exercise and diet for the purpose of being as attractive as possible, like physically attractive. And this person wanted to know whether you think it's rational for a person to value being physically attractive and sort of pursue that in their life through things like diet and exercise.
I mean, I think it's valid to value your appearance and work on improving it. So this kind of question comes up more often with respect to diet and exercise. But if you're really talking about, is it valid to value your appearance? I mean, think about, would you ask this question about, is it valid to want to dress well? Like, is that a value for you? I mean, that's your appearance. Is it valid to value having a hairstyle that complements your best features or something? I mean, all of those kind of people wear makeup. That's all. I mean, you can take great pride in your appearance, and I don't see any reason why that couldn't be a rational value for somebody. Now, the questioner does say that they're, I think the exact words were, very conscious of it. So the question I would ask is, what does that really mean? Like, are you unhealthily obsessed with it? Like, so you get anxiety if you're out to eat and you can't find, chicken salad on the menu, and instead you have to either eat nothing or eat a hamburger. Like, does that give you a panic attack? I mean, I know people who are that concerned about their diets, and I don't think that's a. I mean, that indicate if your career is tied around like your physical appearance, maybe that kind of concern is warranted. But if it's just no, I want to look as good as I can, then that seems to be a little bit of an unhealthy obsession about it. But that you could say that about just about anything. Value, you could have a kind of neurotic approach to a otherwise legitimate value. So.
Yeah, and I think that relates to some of what the questioner was asking with regard to his motivation for focusing on his appearance, and whether it's kind of second-handed. You're just trying to get some sort of pseudo sense of self-esteem by other people's reflected views on you. Like, oh, they think you're attractive, and so you feel like, oh, okay, I'm not a zero, right? And in a way that's it's too much dependent on the opinions of other people. Yeah, I mean, you could have that sort of approach to your appearance, and I think there's something really problematic with that, because there's much more to you than your appearance. Appearance is one aspect. I mean, I would want to look as best as I could. I don't spend much time on it. Maybe that's evident, but I don't spend a lot of time on that. But particularly when you're a teenager, I think it's where you're really sensitive about that sort of thing. People are starting to get interested in you, sort of attracted to people, and it's that at that age, I think you're really sensitive about it, and you care a lot more about it. I think, I don't know how true this is of people in general, but I think the older you get to, I think the more mature you become, the more you become a deeper person, and there's much more things in your life than just how I look. But I think it's valuable. I mean, beauty is a value, and being attractive, that's a value. But I don't think that one's motivation in that regard, like you're trying to be fit and attractive and so on, should be, I think, as the questioner put it, is it the selfish pursuit of the most beautiful mate possible? I don't think that's a rational goal when it comes to choosing a romantic partner. I mean, hopefully I can get myself to a point where someone would find me attractive. I would want that. And hopefully, that if you're looking for a romantic partner, you would want to be attracted to them, I think, and you would want to be attractive to them. That's also a goal, but there's so much more to, and I don't think the question is exactly suggesting this, but there's so much more to choosing a partner than are they a 10 or, I think because once you start living with someone, you're not living with a sculpture, you're living with a person. And it's who they are, what their character are, what they love and what they don't love, and just the whole uniqueness about who they are and what they are. I think that is more important. And I'll say, so one other thing is there's a difference between beauty and attractiveness. Now, this is not objectivism, this is me talking, but there's a difference between beauty and attractiveness. And I think you can have some kind of, I think Ayn Rand did think there were some kind of standards for what beauty is. It's some kind of a symmetry, a harmony of parts, and there's something like that. But attractiveness is different. People can be attracted to people who you wouldn't think of as beautiful. I mean, physically attracted. There are all sorts of different body types, faces, just looks. Some people like long noses, short noses. I mean, you sort of just pick random stuff. It's what also what's attractive, physically attractive about you is also part of who you are, the kind of person you are. Are you witty? Are you funny? Do you love life? And I think that can make you more physically attractive. I think that's the way it works. It's not simply you're like a cutout model or something, and then that's all there is to it, to physical attractiveness. Do you meet the standards of beauty at 7.5 or what? There's much more that goes into attractiveness than a kind of sculpture-like beauty that's perfection or something.
So another issue that came up in some of the discussion that I wanted to ask a follow-up question about is this issue of longevity. And I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on whether kind of the value that you place on longevity, or how you think about this whole kind of issue of health, is affected by the potential of life extension technology, which may be on the horizon in the near future.
So I think it is, and I think that's probably why we get a lot of these questions, because this is sort of in the news recently. Life extension companies being invested in by people like Jeff Bezos. So, and there are objectivists who talk a lot about life extension research. I think there's a reason to think that a lot of the way we think about health, exercise, diet, and then also Aaron was just talking about choosing a romantic partner. In other podcasts, we've talked about choosing a career. I think a lot of those things would have to be rethought if there's radical life extension. So if you're talking about a lifespan of several hundred years or an indefinite lifespan, especially if you're just kind of like frozen at the physical appearance of, say, being 30 years old, that's relevant to what we were talking about with, physical appearance and things like that. So yeah, all of these, or most of the things we've been talking about, we're coming at from the context of there is a human lifespan, and there's an arc to it. Like you kind of physically reach a kind of peak, and then there's a gradual decline as you age. And if those things change, then how you think about your values will change too.
Yeah,
Aaron,
the kind of planning. Yeah, the kind of planning that you do and the kind of thinking about your life is all within the context of a perspective on a lifespan. And if that perspective changed, maybe even some of your dietary things would change. If I can get away with the cholesterol intake or whatever it is, that I have. If I'm thinking I'm going to die at like 85, then if I pursued the same course of action and I knew I was going to be to 200, maybe, and relatively healthy, I would need to adjust. But I don't know a lot about that kind of research. I've read some things, but I can't comment on that.
I think it's still a little in the realm of science fiction, until there's actual results. But I do think it's legitimate to raise the question because of the direction the technology seems to be going.
Yeah. So one more kind of issue on this topic of health and longevity, things like that. There was a related question that came in that was about, basically asked, what if someone chooses to maintain certain qualities in life for longer, but at the potential risk of a shorter overall life, and kind of gave some examples of people who engage in kind of like risky activities like free climbing or and smoking and all things like that. And the questioner was wondering if these individuals the individuals who are doing this, are they in conflict with the idea of life as the standard of morality?
I think it depends on what's motivating somebody in taking risk, because everything in life has some risk, and some risks are greater than others. But the question that's relevant, I think, is so take the free climber example, since the questioner brought that up. Free climbing is rock climbing, mountain climbing without any safety gear. That's how I understand it. Or I think you could also include these people who climb like buildings and. So what exactly is the source of the enjoyment there? because if it's just the climbing, you could get the same enjoyment with your harness and your safety materials. And if the idea is like, well, I want to climb this mountain without slipping once, and if I do it free, then I can like prove that I've done it, if I get to the top. But you could do the same thing with gear. Or just like have somebody keep a watch on you. Yeah, he never slipped, so he made it to the top without slipping. I think what makes those activities appealing to a lot of people is that it's like laughing in the face of death. And that's, I don't think, a valid motivation. At the very least, it's not a healthy one to say, why was that so enjoyable? Because I could have died. That's why it was enjoyable. Like, I don't know about that. But if, there are risky activities, the pleasure of which isn't really the risk. It's the activity. Like I like the physical exertion and the challenge of climbing this mountain, and I like being outdoors, and I like the all the different reasons people go hiking, climbing, mountaineering. They're not really about, oh, maybe I'll die. It's no, this is fun. So
yeah, and you can contrast that too with careers that are dangerous and very high risk, like you're a firefighter, or you're a policeman, or you're like or you're in the military, you're a career military professional. All of these involve a lot of risk, but there's an actual career there. It's not that I'm trying to cheat death. You're pursuing a career. Like these are valid goals. So it's to be involved in the police force. You're trying to maintain law and order, to protect people's rights, to protect people from harm, and so on. These are valid pursuits. And same with firefighting. And you could take also things like, I know Dr. Leonard Peikoff discusses this kind of, he presents an answer to this kind of question in a Q&A period in his lecture, Objectivism, the State of the Art. And he was asked a question something like this, and he brought up the example of, what was his first name? Yeager? He's a test pilot.
Chuck Yeager.
He was one of the
Chuck Yeager.
Yeah. I read a book about him, but it was very interesting. But he's the first person that's like fly supersonic, and it was dangerous. I mean, it was really. But he's pushing the edges and the boundaries of knowledge and testing and equipment, and it's a real career that he loved, and it wasn't just he was going out for kicks, because you have to draw the line between, are you engaged in something risky, whether you're pursuing a genuine value, or are you just flirting with death? And I think that's irrational. If you're just out to flirt with death and haha, I cheated it this time. I think that's just irrational. You're toying with your life in ways that it's not like, well, I like bacon, and that's not the same thing. Yeah. And I don't want to get into drawing lines, like how many cigarettes can you have, and it's something like that. But you have to think about that as an individual. Like what is a rational calculation of the risk involved, and are you really pursuing something that you can justify in reason, that this is a valid goal? There are some risks. I've thought about the risks, and this makes sense to pursue, versus no, I really shouldn't be doing this. That you have to figure out.
Let's move on to the second issue we wanted to discuss today. So we got a question about basically, can values be objective if they depend on human evaluations? And the questioner also presented us with an argument that they wanted us to comment on, and I think we're going to put that up on the screen. Do we have that? Okay, there it is. Yeah, so this argument goes, if there is no sentient life in the universe, then there is no value either. It follows that all value ultimately originates from sentient beings and their perspectives on reality. Since value is necessarily perspective dependent from the viewpoint of sentient beings, it is thus impossible for value to be objective by the definition of objective. If objective value doesn't exist, then it is necessarily the case that objective morality cannot exist either. Morality is therefore subjective, since it is based on value, which is based on the perspectives of sentient life, QED. So perspectives on this argument and the issues around it?
So I think the first thing we wanted to bring up is that I think, Aaron, you're going to talk about the way the argument conceives the objective.
Maybe we should just say one thing here, just at the outset, is objectivism, hence the name, objectivism, holds that morality is objective, that values are objective. So it's taking a stand on a position.
I think
Have we lost Aaron?
Did Aaron froze for you? I think we lost Aaron.
Yeah.
Okay, so while we wait for Aaron to return, let me just say what I was going to say. So I think what Aaron will say when he returns is that the question is working with a view of what objective means that objectivism does not accept or agree with. So I think the operating view of objective in this question is what objectivism would call an intrinsic theory of value. And the idea of that is that that values are independent of anyone's perspective or valuing of them. If there were no, as the questioner puts it, if there were no sentient beings, there would be still be value according to this intrinsic view of value. So to give an example, I once read something by a somewhat prominent philosopher, Colin McGinn, who argued that if there were no human beings or sentient beings anymore, the Mona Lisa would still be beautiful. It would still have great aesthetic value. So that's an intrinsic theory of value. There's something out there independent of anybody that is value or valuable and will remain that way apart from anyone. And that's not how objectivism conceives value or objectivity. So about the argument itself, I think one of the first things I want to say about it is that the argument as presented is it assumes what it's trying to prove, or in other words, it's question begging. So the first premise of the argument, this statement, if there is no sentient life in the universe, then there is no value either, that says the same thing as the conclusion. That is values tied to the subject, necessarily tied to the subject. So I don't think this is a good argument against an intrinsic theory of value. So even though objectivism agrees that it's not true that value is just out there independent of any valuer, I don't think this is a good argument against that position. Aaron, welcome back.
Yeah. Sorry, my internet froze. My existence was merely subjective. This is me again. So I think there's also, in the statement of the argument, there's by the definition of objective, this such and such. Well, what's the definition of objective? In this context, and I think one of the things that is common is the assumption that what objective means is that it's mind independent, like it's out there in the world, it is what it is, irrespective of anybody's views about it, perspective on it, and so on. So it's sort of, it's part of the furniture of the world, as sometimes people put it. It's just there. And that, in this context, that's not what objectivism thinks of. That's not how objectivism would characterize what objective means. When we talk about objective reality, like in a metaphysical context, that's what it means. It's mind independent. So like the universe is what it is, whether you like it or not, whether your viewpoint of it is correct or mistaken. So it is what it is. But in the context of values, that's not what objectivism means by objective. So if you think of objective means it's out there in the world independent of consciousness, and then you say, yeah, but there's a sense in which there's no such thing as values if no one actually values anything. So it takes an input from a consciousness and having a perspective on this is good for me or this is bad for me or whatever. There's a perspective which there are no values unless someone actually wants something or thinks it's something is valuable. So then you say, well, for something to be objective, it's got to be independent of a perspective on it, that a consciousness has on it. And yet values require a perspective from a valuer. And so there can't be any objective values. But again, that's not, that kind of argument's not coming from objectivism's perspective on what it means for a value to be objective. So, I mean, for Ayn Rand, for a value to be objective, it means that this is how Ayn Rand characterizes it. It means that it's chosen according to a rational standard of value, and it's validated by a rational process. So these are acts of consciousness. So yes, it definitely requires an act of consciousness to identify something as a value. But so various things that might be valued, they do stand in a kind of causal relationship to an organism's life. So it's like water. Whether you value water or not, water is a requirement of human life. There's a factual causal relationship between the water and the continuance of human life. You can not want to live and not care about water, and so I don't want to live, so I don't care about drinking water, and so it won't be a value for you in the sense that you don't value it, and in that context, it wouldn't be a value for you. But that doesn't mean the causal relationship disappears. That is a requirement of human life. So once you really make the choice to, like, I want to live, then what it brings into context is, well, then there are a lot of facts that I need to know. Like, what is this relationship? What is this thing's relationship to my life? Does it hinder it? Does it harm it? Does it further it? Does it impede it? And then all sorts of factual issues come into play. But it does take an input from consciousness. So I want to live, and as a result, I want things that help me do that. And that's, how you get into the whole issue of like values and morality, and that's why you need guidance in life, like what to choose, what to do, what diet. Not to get back to that, but that's what brings in this sort of perspective. But I don't think it's true to say values come into play when a living organism has a certain perspective on certain things. To say that it's perspective dependent in the sense that it's subjective, it requires an input and an evaluation from a living being. But it's its factual relationship to the organism's life that is the kind of the anchor between it. That's why it's not subjective. It's like if you're trying to live, there's a factual causal relationship between these kinds of activities and these kinds of goals and your actual life, and that's really the anchor. Yeah.
So the questioner also brought up a follow-up and kind of asked to compare this argument to an example that Ayn Rand gives in her essay, The Objectivist Ethics, about an immortal, indestructible robot. Do you have any thoughts on that example and how it's related to the issue that we've been discussing?
Yeah, so this is an example. It's page 16 of the latest edition of The Virtue of Selfishness. It's in the chapter, The Objectivist Ethics. And the example, it's pretty short. It's about it's a paragraph long example. It concerns a immortal, indestructible robot that can move itself around in the world, but nothing it does or that happens to it affects it really in any way. And she makes a claim that this robot wouldn't have any value. So that's the example the questioner's asking about. So one thing to say is that the way the questioner raises this robot example is he describes it as an argument. So I think the first thing to say is that the robot example in that essay is not an argument or part of an argument. There's the few paragraphs before the robot example are the argument in favor of the conclusion that value depends on life. The robot example is supposed to clarify that, help you understand the meaning of it or the implications of it. It's not part of the positive case in favor of it. And I don't think it really touches on the same issue that the questioner is asking about either. The example is about the relationship between life and value, not between sentience and value. So those are two different, not unrelated, but they're different issues. So that's I think more or less all there is to say about that. Unless Aaron, did you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in the context of the kind of addressing the question in the podcast, I think that's all to say. But that's what I mean, there's certainly because there's certainly more to say about it. Like because there's
sure.
So there's the question of life being the standard of value, and man's life being the standard of moral value. And so there's more to this. So the issue of life as a standard of value is the wider issue. Life is the phenomenon that gives rise to the whole issue of something to be valuable. And so there's something right about what the person who posed the argument is assuming is that, it is true that, I mean, objectivism certainly thinks that in a world of rocks and rivers and space dust, like no living organisms, there's no right and wrong. There are no values. No values at all. So it is true that it's the phenomenon of living organisms who face a fundamental alternative of life or death, joy or suffering, pleasure or pain, that produces these alternatives. That an entity that has to act in the face of an alternative has to say, well, which ones do I embrace and which ones do I avoid? And that brings up that whole polarity, or whatever you want to call it. It's that duality between the pro-life and the anti-life. And Ayn Rand identifies that that's why life brings this up. It's that choice between these two things. It's an alternative between life and death and its harbingers, if you want to put it that way. And yet that's so it's the yardstick that a living organism would have to use. Now, for non-human organisms, for the most part, they have it pre-programmed in them, so they kind of pursue certain kinds of things. And some higher animals learn on the job, so to speak, a bit about what hurts them and what doesn't hurt. But for human beings, it's really like you're not born with that. And so the issue of choosing to embrace life and choosing and selecting values and trying to find the relevant knowledge that you would need to acquire in order to know how to even make choices, the issue of choice becomes a big deal when it comes to thinking about ethics and which values to choose. And that's also what brings into the issue is, isn't it subjective if you're choosing and you're and the reality doesn't just decide for you? What reality establishes on its own, irrespective of you and your choices and your perspectives, is the causal relationship between certain things and your continued existence. That's not up to you. That's just set by the nature of reality. But what you then have to contribute is, what's my perspective on that? What are the things I want to embrace? And
and I take the robot example to be isolating that causality part. Because part of the example is that the actions the robot takes have no effect on himself. So it's kind of in that example that, nothing's at stake. The causal relationship between the external world and the continuation of his motion, his existence is severed in the example.
Let's move on to the third issue for this podcast. And the questioner who submitted this question writes, when is aid to others rational? More specifically, how do I evaluate whether the emotional benefit I get in aiding others is rationally based, assuming the premise that emotional benefit can be a rational basis of action?
Okay, maybe we'll divide that up a little bit. I mean, I think this is also another question that arises in the context of the fact that objectivism regards the pursuit of one's own rational self-interest as the essence of morality. So it's an egoistic morality. So then this raises the question, yeah, what about other people, and so on. So this question about what about helping others? When is it rational? When is it kosher, so to speak, from an objectivist perspective? And I think the short answer to that question about when is it rational is, the answer is, well, when it's in your interest. When you're pursuing a rational value. How do you evaluate when the emotional benefit you get in aiding others is rationally based? Well, I mean, then you have to think about, it can't just be, well, it feels good, right? So I guess it is good. That's certainly not the objectivist perspective. So you have to ask yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? What is it I'm trying to achieve by it? So, I mean, I'm a teacher, right? I mean, I teach philosophy. I've been teaching other things for many years. And so I love teaching. I love helping other people. It's one of the most enjoyable things that I do. But a lot of this it's in the pursuit of a career that I love. Like, if I hated philosophy and I didn't like the kids and I didn't like the students and I hate university life or whatever it is, it's like, then it's like, oh, why go help these students? Because they don't know about philosophy? That's not a goal. For me, I'm pursuing a rational value. I mean, the education of students about a subject that I think it's super important for them to know. It's made a big impact on my own life. I know how important it is to people, that people know more about it and they're better equipped to think philosophically and so on. And it's also the enjoyment of my ability to teach. There's a whole lot of things that are self-interested, rationally valuable, and so on. So if I have a student that I think is really promising, yeah, I'll probably spend more time with them in office hours, maybe give them much more freedom in terms of their ability to contact me and discuss things. And, but then you could also have a student that's really struggling with the material. They're not quite as good. They're not quite as equipped, but they're trying to understand. And what you're honoring there is, here's a mind trying to grapple with something, trying to understand and not getting it. And you want to help that. You want to encourage those. That's a real positive value in life. And maybe they're not super cut out for certain kind of fields or whatever, but you want to encourage that kind of thing. And also, as a teacher, this is like, I want to get better at how can I explain this to someone who's maybe less equipped, and so you have to ask, like, what is it you're doing? Why are you doing it? Is there a rational value you're actually pursuing or honoring when you're doing it? Or is it just, you're raised in an altruistic culture and it's sort of, you're going to get a positive emotional feedback from doing things that you think are moral. And if you think altruism is moral, you'll get a little spike. Or maybe if you go, work at the soup kitchen or something. But that, again, the spike that you get doesn't mean it's right. It means you're getting positive feedback emotionally from what you take to be your values. So the idea is to try to get your values aligned with what's actually rationally supporting your life, so that the feedback you get is related to that, not the opposite.
Yeah. So if the question is, when is it rational to aid others? I agree. If you think objectivism is true, the answer is going to be when it's in your self-interest. But then, so beyond that, it's going to matter who the people are and what it means to aid them. I think, like, in part of like answering the question in any specific case, that's what you're going to ask yourself. So, when is it rational to help your friends? Versus when is it rational to, like Aaron was saying, volunteer at the soup kitchen, spend your Thanksgiving giving turkey dinners to the homeless or something. I mean, those are different cases, and you're going to have way more egoistic reasons to help your friends than you are to help strangers. So part of the answer to this question is going to be, what exactly do you mean by aiding others? Like, what others? What kind of aid? If you have an egoistic perspective on this, it's going to come down to, what value are they to you? Now, Aaron, well, I was going to comment on just the kind of idea that people take pleasure in helping at the soup kitchen. Yeah. So if somebody says, I work at the soup kitchen and I enjoy it, I get a sense of pride, let's say, out of helping. I sacrificed my Sunday to the less fortunate. Does that make me, I've heard people say this, that's a selfish reason to do it. Have you ever heard somebody kind of have that idea? Like, I take pleasure in helping people. So I guess I'm kind of, like everybody's selfish kind of idea. But I think it's relevant, as Aaron pointed out, that, well, if you feel good about helping at the soup kitchen because you think you're morally obligated to sacrifice your Sundays, that's not really an egoistic motivation, even if you feel that kind of positive affective state as a response to it. If egoism is true, then it's false that it's good to sacrifice your Sundays. So, so the pleasure you're getting out of it is kind of misplaced. It's not going to be, I feel good about it is a sufficient explanation for, or a sufficient reason to help somebody. I mean, that could be part of it. Hopefully you feel good about doing good things, but.
Yeah, and there's another thing it's a little more, there's another aspect of this that's a bit more tricky introspectively. In other words, there's a respect in which part of this is harder to conceptualize. So I'm a pretty benevolent guy. I actually enjoy helping people, and I'm kind of, I don't know, gregarious isn't the right word. I like people, and I like interacting with them, and on all sorts of levels, but it comes very naturally to me, and it's not everybody's like that, but for some reason it's just natural for me. Like you're walking down the grocery aisle, or some shorter person, they're trying to reach some box of cereal and they can't quite reach it, and I'm always happy to, here you go. I don't run around the grocery store trying to find people to help, but it's just that you're passing by, and it's a kind of a courtesy that's pleasant to do, and I'm taller, and I'm able to do that, and I'm happy to do it, and it's nice to be able to do. And so when you're doing that, it's like, well, what's the rational value that I'm pursuing? Do I want this lady to then do something for me? And well, of course not. That's not the way you think about it. These things kind of flow naturally out of a certain kind of respect for other people, which comes out of a respect for yourself. So there's a sense in which, like, you have a certain self-respect, and there's a kind of, you look on other people as they're like me, in effect, or at least potentially like me, and I don't know, I don't have a negative view of them, and so I'm more likely to go do something like that. Now, if you ask, well, what's the value you're trying to achieve? That's harder to conceptualize. You have to really think about that, because it's not like some concrete, like, well, maybe they'll let me in front of them in the line at the cashier. Like, no, that's ridiculous. But it's more, I don't know how I would put it. I'm living in the kind of world I want to live in. I'm engaging with other people as I think people should engage with each other, at least in the general principle. It's not like some obligation that if you walk past it, you're supposed to do something because objectivism. No, that's not true. But just, if I had to introspect about my own actions, it's something, I would have to say it's something like that. And I think there's a real value in that. It's just harder to put your finger on. Is like, oh, this is what it is. This is what I'm after. Because you don't think of it as I'm after something. It's just, it flows out of a certain perspective on life and on people and on myself and the kind of world I want to live in, the way I think people should interact, and the kind of benevolence that I don't know, that I want to live in, that kind of world where people are better like that, and more, they look on themselves more as potential allies and not potential threats. You don't have to be a Pollyanna.
One of the ways to make that, like, if you value a world where people are mutually supportive and polite and courteous, one of the ways to make that value real is to actually be polite and courteous and support other people. It'd be bizarre if you say, I really want a world where everybody's polite, and then you're just this jerk who cuts in line, and like some old lady asks you to get a cereal box down from the shelf, and you kind of smirk and shrug your shoulders and walk away. Like, that's not living your values. If you value a world of polite cooperation, and
it's kind of like honoring your values in action.
Yeah.
So maybe as a last follow-up, the questioner was also interested and the questioner also wanted to know what measures they can take to determine whether any specific aid they're providing to others is based on irrational emotional benefits versus irrational emotions. Do you have any thoughts on measures that one can use to determine the rational from the irrational?
Well, one thing you can do is just state to yourself explicitly what emotions you're experiencing. So if you're volunteering at the soup kitchen and you kind of feel the sort of the I'm such a great guy, I'm better than the average person kind of feeling, the feeling of moral superiority, that probably tells you that there's part of why you're enjoying this is that you think it's the right thing to do, and then you want to introspect on, well, what do I mean by it? Is this the right thing to do? What does that mean to me? Where does that sense of moral rightness come from? So I think that's the first step, is because it's sometimes you say, I feel good about it. Well, I mean, that's not really, there's a lot of different emotions that could be. There's a lot of different positive emotional states. So you want to figure out which emotion you're actually experiencing as a first step.
Yeah, and as part of being explicit, what is the rational positive value that I'm trying to achieve? What am I really aiming at? And I think that's the one's going to be harder to specify if what you're doing is something that's coming out of something irrational or something that is altruistic. I mean, the question, when is aid to others rational? I mean, this is coming out of, there's a wide expectation, just saturated, and the culture saturated with altruism. The idea that, well, you guys are saying it should be about self-interest, but yeah, but what about other people? Because that's the immovable point, right? Well, it has to be able to account for that. Like, what would you do? And that's why that question always comes up. And when you start looking at it more from an objectivist perspective, is why is that a fixed point? Like, why is that the unalterable thing that must somehow get in there, and otherwise it's not a valid moral theory? I mean, that's the saturation of altruism in the culture that makes this a prominent issue. But it is what is a sensible question. It's like, well, when is it rational? And the idea is, well, when it's in your interests. But you can't take that too narrowly to mean, I do this for you, you do that for me, kind of thing. And that's what we've been trying to explore a bit. There's some of the richness of the way to think about that kind of issue.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
You going to close us out here, Sam? All right.
That's okay.
I think we're at time.
Let's wrap up here.
Yeah.
So I just want to take a moment to thank those who support ARI, our donors, and those who make this podcast possible. We really appreciate it. If you are interested in any of the topics we've been discussing today and want to continue the conversation, we're going on to Clubhouse right after we get offline from this podcast. It's the Ayn Rand Club on the Clubhouse app. So if you want to talk about health and fitness, the objectivity of values, helping other people, you have questions or comments about those, please join us right after the show on Clubhouse. We also have a couple of resources that we wanted to mention that are kind of go deeper into some of the issues that we talked about today. So there are two essays from Ayn Rand that we wanted to mention. There's her essay, What is Capitalism?, which is in her book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and is also online at that link, bit.ly/whatiscapitalism. And the other essay we wanted to mention is The Ethics of Emergencies, which is in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness, and also online at bit.ly/virtue of selfishness, or I think that's maybe a link to the book and not the essay. I don't know. Sorry. Next week, join us on the podcast when we are going to talk about Ayn Rand, The Challenge of Rethinking Conventional Wisdom. And Aaron will be here again next week to talk about that, along with Ankar Gate. So look forward to that topic next week. And I've just been informed that that link for the ethics of emergencies to the book and not to the essay, which is not online. So there's clarification on that. If you want to get more content from us and support our channel, please subscribe and click the bell icon, which will give you notifications when we go live in podcasts like this. And if you have questions or comments, if you want to ask questions for future installments of this series, which is a regular series that we do, email us at newideal@aynrand.org. We read all of those emails and we respond to many of them. And if you raise questions that are worth covering in a Q&A, they'd love to hear them to talk about them in a future episode. So that's our show today. Thanks, Aaron and Mike, for being here, and thank you all for watching. And see some of you on Clubhouse.